The early morning fog in Oak Hollow always carried a damp, earthy scent that clung to uniforms and crept under collars. On April 14, 1995, that fog slithered low and thick across the ground as deputies Tom Briggs and Kyle Monroe rolled down County Road 12 in a dusty Crown Victoria. The sun had barely risen, and the headlights cast long, eerie shadows across the gnarled tree trunks lining the remote road. Inside the car, the radio buzzed quietly with static and occasional dispatch chatter, but the two men said little. Tom, the older of the two, was a man of few words, with eyes like smoke-stained glass and a jaw that never seemed to relax. Kyle, new to the force, still carried the anxious energy of a rookie trying too hard not to mess up. That morning, their patrol was supposed to be routine. Just a loop through the north side where abandoned sheds and forgotten logging trails peppered the woods. Nothing ever happened up there. Just coyotes and beer cans and the occasional runaway dog. But by 7:42 a.m., the radio fell silent. The Crown Vic vanished, and Tom Briggs and Kyle Monroe were never seen again. Oak Hollow was a small town then, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and nothing ever really changed. The disappearance rattled it to its bones. Volunteers flooded the woods. Dogs sniffed through brush, helicopters thumped overhead, and state troopers stomped mud into places no foot had touched in decades, but no trace, no blood, no gunfire, no signs of struggle. The patrol car might as well have been swallowed whole by the earth, and for 18 years that's exactly what people assumed. The case went cold. Files gathered dust. The families mourned in silence and suspicion. But stories like these have a way of resurfacing. They linger in the walls of courthouses and in the silence between whispers. They haunt people in small, unshakable ways. And in Oak Hollow, it began again with a sound. Not a scream or a crash, but something stranger. On May 19, 2013, a construction crew digging beneath the old courthouse hit something unexpected. They were replacing worn pipes and redoing the foundation part of a long-overdue renovation. The courthouse itself was a relic from the 1920s, all stone archways and stained glass justice. When the jackhammer cracked open the floor near the southeast wing, the foreman expected more clay. Instead, his boots clinked against metal. It was a trapdoor, rusted, hidden under layers of concrete and time about 4 feet wide and heavy as sin. The workers stopped. The foreman called the sheriff called the mayor, and by evening the old courthouse was surrounded by yellow tape and whispers. They pried the trapdoor open 2 days later. It took 4 men and a winch. What lay beneath it was not a forgotten maintenance tunnel or a root cellar. It was a staircase. Narrow, steep, and descending into darkness that seemed to pull at the edges of your vision. They brought in floodlights and generators. The first officers who went down came back up pale and silent. They refused to speak of what they saw. The town held its breath. It was Amanda Monroe, Kyle's younger sister, who pushed to see the sight herself. She had been 14 when her brother disappeared and had never stopped asking questions. Over the years, she had annoyed cops reporters and archivists. She had pored over every police report, every interview transcript, every unverified tip scribbled on a diner napkin. Her obsession had cost her jobs, relationships, and sleep, but it also gave her resolve. And now there was a staircase under the courthouse. She was not going to be left out. The sheriff, an old friend of her father's, reluctantly allowed her to descend with the second team. Amanda's boots clicked on stone as she followed 2 deputies and a tech down the stairs. The air changed as they descended, grew colder, heavier. The walls, made of brick blackened with mildew, closed in tight. At the bottom, the corridor opened into a large chamber. The floodlights revealed long tables, dusty chairs, and crates stacked in careful rows. Most were marked with numbers. Some bore county seals. Amanda's breath caught. These were evidence boxes. From when, she moved toward one. A box labeled CR 100-7694 sat open. Inside, she saw a radio, a deputy badge, and a sealed envelope. She reached for it, heart pounding. But then she stopped. Her eyes flicked to the far wall. Something had been etched into the stone. Letters, names. She stepped closer, and there, carved deep and ragged, were the words T. Briggs and K. Monroe. She didn't scream, didn't cry, her body simply froze, her skin buzzing like live wire. One of the deputies behind her muttered something, but Amanda barely heard him. The cellar seemed to tilt just slightly, as if reality itself was adjusting to accommodate the impossible. This place was not an accident. It was not a storage area. It was a secret, a hidden place buried beneath justice itself, and her brother's name was etched into its wall. Later, officials would try to explain the chamber. Some said it was part of Prohibition-era operations. Others whispered about the cult conspiracies, black sites. But none of it made sense. No one could explain why evidence connected to the missing deputies was down there, or why the stairwell was sealed shut from above with no internal latch, or who had been visiting the chamber over the years as the footprints and cigarette butts suggested. Amanda took photos. She filed petitions. She raised hell, and the deeper she dug, the more stories she uncovered. Stories of people who vanished around town, of court records that suddenly went missing, of a judge who retired early and moved to Argentina. The deeper she looked, the darker it got. And then she found the recording, a tape hidden in an unmarked box with no label and no date. It was audio only. Fuzzy, but intact. And what she heard on that tape would shatter everything she thought she knew about her brother's last day. The voice that came through the static was unmistakably Tom Briggs. And he was not alone. He was begging, warning, whispering about things buried too deep to stay quiet forever. What happened to Tom Briggs and Kyle Monroe was no longer just a cold case. It was a locked room mystery built into the very foundation of Oak Hollow. And for the first time in 18 years, someone had the key. Amanda Monroe returned the next day before the courthouse opened to the public. She had not slept. Her hands still smelled faintly of mildew and dust. The images of the trapdoor and the underground chamber haunted her. She had uploaded the photos to a secure drive and made printed copies. Her heart pounded as she approached the southeast wing of the courthouse. A makeshift plywood wall now blocked the entrance to the newly discovered cellar. A notice from the county office declared it unsafe. Amanda stepped closer and pressed her ear to the wood. Silence answered. The sheriff had promised her access but claimed the chamber was now under state review. She knew what that meant. They were stalling, covering, possibly removing. She pulled out her phone and called Greg Pearson, an old high school friend who worked as a maintenance contractor for the county. He owed her a favor. 20 minutes later, Greg met her around the back of the building near the utility shed. He looked tired and hesitant, but he handed her a key. He said it would open the south basement access door. He did not ask questions. Amanda did not offer explanations. She waited until dusk. By then, most employees had left for the day. She slipped inside through the service entrance. Her boots echoed in the empty corridor as she moved past the water heaters and janitor closets. The air grew colder again as she descended towards the sealed-off area. When she reached the locked door, she hesitated only a moment before sliding in the key. It turned with a reluctant click. The door opened to reveal a narrow hallway that led back toward the trapdoor chamber. But something had changed. The crates were gone, the tables stripped. The wall, where the names had been carved, had been painted over. Amanda stood frozen. The emptiness screamed louder than any sound. It was not just cleaned. It had been erased. She walked slowly through the space. Her flashlight caught pieces of wood and bent nails where the crates had been stacked. In one corner, she saw something the cleaners had missed. A strip of cloth. She knelt and picked it up. It was part of a uniform. Sheriff Department issue. Her fingers trembled as she folded it into her coat pocket. Behind her, a metal hinge squeaked faintly. She spun, expecting a door to move, but nothing shifted. The sound echoed again. She traced it to the far wall near the base of a crumbling support pillar. Amanda crouched. The pillar looked solid at first glance, but as she pressed her hand along its surface, she felt a draft. A line of cooler air seeped through a thin crack where the mortar had worn away. She searched for a tool and found a broken mop handle in a nearby utility bucket. She jammed it into the crack and pried. A soft groan filled the chamber as the brick face of the pillar shifted. Behind it lay another opening. A doorway, narrow and black, just wide enough for one person. Amanda swallowed hard and stepped inside. The passage beyond was tighter built from mismatched stones and lined with rusted piping. She followed the pipe downward. Her flashlight beam flicked over more scratches on the wall. Some were initials. Others resembled tally marks. She counted dozens, some fresh, some barely visible. After 15 minutes of careful descent, the passage opened into a second room. This one was smaller and filled with decaying furniture, a cot, a desk, a broken mirror. On the desk lay a yellowed ledger. Amanda stepped forward and opened it. The pages were filled with names. Some she recognized, others she did not. Each had a date, and a column labeled Decision. Most were marked with the letter I. A few had the word relocated, 2 had the word erased. At the bottom of one page was a handwritten note. It said, Briggs resisted. Monroe compliant. Relocate both pending further instruction. Amanda stared at the note until the letters blurred. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. No signal. She took photos anyway, every page, every word. Something creaked behind her. She turned and listened. The room was still. But on the cot a faint indentation marred the thin mattress, as if someone had recently sat there. She moved cautiously to the far end of the room and found a small locker, its door bent slightly. Inside was a boot. The sole worn nearly flat. The initials TB were scratched into the leather. She clutched it to her chest and closed her eyes. Then she noticed the writing on the wall above the cot. Faded, but legible. It read, If you find this, I was here. I never stopped hoping. TB Amanda left the chamber quickly. She retraced her steps and climbed back through the narrow tunnel. She resealed the pillar as best she could. As she exited the courthouse, the streetlights flickered on. Her hands trembled as she walked to her car. She drove to the nearest diner and spread her evidence across the booth table. Photos, the cloth strip, the boot. She ordered coffee and waited. Someone had to see it. Someone had to believe her. A half-hour later, she called her old journalism professor, now editor at the Oak Hollow Tribune. She told him she had a story. He asked if it could wait until morning. Amanda said no. This was bigger than both of them. As she waited for him to arrive, she stared out the window. The courthouse stood in the distance, dark, still, but something moved behind one of the upper windows. A flicker, a shadow. Amanda leaned closer, and the light behind the glass went out. Amanda Monroe sat stiffly in the booth as the overhead lights of the diner flickered slightly from a passing truck outside. Her coffee had gone cold. Her eyes burned from fatigue, but she remained still. Across from her, Martin Delaney adjusted his glasses and stared at the evidence spread before him. He had once been Amanda's professor, but now looked more like a weary archivist than an editor. He moved slowly through the photographs lingering on the etching above the cot and the faded ledger with its chilling entries. The silence between them grew heavy as Martin leaned back and ran a hand down his beard. He asked Amanda where exactly she had found the boot and ledger. She replied with precision, the lower chamber beyond a false wall beneath the courthouse. She explained how the area had been deliberately cleaned, and yet signs of concealment remained. Martin frowned deeply and said the last time someone tried to investigate missing evidence in Oak Hollow, they resigned 2 weeks later and moved to Alaska. He told her the courthouse had a reputation. Old cases disappeared. Witness statements were altered. He once saw a sealed envelope change its content overnight in a court file. Amanda leaned forward and asked him what he knew about Judge Raymond Lorre. Martin blinked slowly before answering. Judge Lorre had served from the late 1970s to the mid-1990s. His record was long but oddly clean. He was respected, rarely challenged, but there had been rumors, late-night sessions, trials without dockets, files marked for internal review that never reappeared. And then one day he retired early and left the country. Argentina. No one knew why. Amanda pulled out a copy of the personnel list she had taken from the evidence box. Lorre's name appeared near the bottom in the notes. A short sentence read, "Reviewed and approved by R. Lorre." She asked Martin what kind of authority a county judge would need to oversee off-record detainments. Martin shook his head and said none, unless it was not official. Unless it was something else entirely. They spoke in hushed voices for another hour. Amanda pressed for names of people who worked in the courthouse during that time. Martin provided 3. The retired clerk, Eleanor Price, the former bailiff, Curtis Dunn, and a records custodian named Lisa Harvin, who now lived in a care facility on the outskirts of town. Amanda wrote each name in a notebook and thanked him. She gathered her evidence and left the diner with purpose. The next morning, Amanda drove to a small cottage just beyond the city limits. It belonged to Eleanor Price. The porch sagged slightly and a rusted wind chime clattered faintly. Eleanor answered the door slowly and squinted against the light. Her hair was pure white and her eyes sharp. Amanda introduced herself and mentioned Kyle Monroe. The woman's face changed. She stepped back and invited Amanda in. The inside of the home smelled of lemon polish and old paper. Amanda explained what she had found. Eleanor listened quietly. When Amanda showed her the photograph of the ledger, Eleanor gasped softly. She said she had seen that ledger before. It was kept in the courthouse basement. Judge Lorre kept the key. Eleanor said she only saw inside it once. She had opened it by mistake when sorting files. She recalled names listed under coded phrases. One line simply read "witness incompatible." Another had the word "risk" with an underline. She said she reported the error, but 2 days later her access was restricted. They told her it was for her protection. Amanda asked if she remembered Tom Briggs or Kyle Monroe. Eleanor nodded and said she remembered the day they disappeared. She remembered something else, too. A courier had arrived that morning with a sealed package addressed to Judge Lorre. She never saw what was inside, but said the judge seemed nervous that day. He left early, and no one saw him for 3 days. Amanda thanked Eleanor and made her way back into town. Her next stop was the care facility. Lisa Harvin had worked in records for over 20 years before she suffered a stroke. Amanda met her in the garden area where she sat wrapped in a blanket. Lisa's speech was slow, but her mind sharp. Amanda asked her about the hidden files. Lisa said the courthouse had rooms not listed on any blueprint. She said some files were double-coded. A case would have one folder for public view and a second version hidden in a private room. Lisa said Judge Lorre oversaw those rooms himself. She had seen him enter with 2 deputies. She had never seen the deputies leave. Amanda showed her the boot. Lisa stared at it for several seconds before nodding. She said she had cleaned mud from a pair just like it once. She remembered the initials. She remembered the smell of mildew and something else. Fear. Later that afternoon, Amanda called Curtis Dunn. The phone rang 5 times before a tired voice answered. She introduced herself and asked if he had worked during the spring of 1995. He said yes. She asked if he remembered April 14th. He paused for a long moment before saying he did. He remembered the courthouse being closed that morning. Maintenance, they had said, but he arrived early and saw Judge Lorre speaking to 2 deputies in the south wing. One had red hair, the other wore a badge that flashed in the light. He remembered because Lorre never spoke to patrol deputies. Curtis said the next day the hallway near the records room was locked. No one explained why. 2 weeks later, a notice appeared stating the area was condemned due to mold. Curtis said he never saw Lorre again after that month. Amanda took notes carefully. She thanked him. After ending the call, she sat quietly in her car. Her notes now formed a pattern. Judge Lorre, hidden files, double-coded records, a trapdoor sealed from above, and deputies who vanished without a trace. She opened her laptop and began compiling her findings. The courthouse had been more than a place of justice. It had been something else, a machine that processed secrets and left no witness behind. She stared at the screen and added one more entry to her file. Underlined and bold. Who else knew? Amanda sat at her kitchen table with a steaming cup of coffee and the rising sun pushing pale light through the windows. The walls were covered in notes. Strings of yarn stretched between pinned photographs. Newspaper clippings overlapped with hand-drawn maps and timelines. Her eyes stung from lack of sleep, but her mind remained alert. Each thread pointed back to the courthouse. Each name returned to the judge. Each date circled the day of the disappearance. She now had testimony from 3 former employees. Each one corroborated the existence of hidden records and unauthorized access. Amanda needed someone new, someone whose voice still echoed inside the courthouse, someone who had seen the old world but remained active today. She remembered the name Sharon Wiles. She was not a clerk or a custodian. She had been a court reporter. Amanda found her email address buried in an alumni directory from a local college. She wrote a brief message and included only one sentence. "Do you remember what happened to Tom Briggs and Kyle Monroe?" Amanda hit send and waited. 2 hours later, her phone buzzed with a reply. The message was short. "I cannot say anything over email. Meet me in person, bring what you found." The address that followed belonged to a small house on the north edge of Oak Hollow near the cemetery. Amanda drove there late in the afternoon. The sky hung low and gray. When she knocked on the door, Sharon answered quickly and ushered her inside. The house smelled of cedar and old paper. Sharon appeared older than Amanda expected. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured tea. She said she had been waiting for this conversation for years. Amanda listened as Sharon explained her role. She had worked the courtroom audio equipment and transcribed proceedings during Judge Laurie's final years. Sharon paused and said some cases never reached the official log. Some cases were spoken only. No records were filed. No transcripts produced. Amanda asked what she meant. Sharon described a specific session. April 13th, 1995, late evening, only 6 people present. Judge Laurie, a bailiff, 2 uniformed deputies, a county supervisor, and a man whose name she never heard. She remembered the room was colder than usual. The air smelled faintly of bleach and something metallic. She said she typed quietly as the judge read from a file. He did not use the full names. He called them Subject Alpha and Subject Beta. He mentioned security risk, compromised operation, reintegration pending compliance. Sharon remembered the tone. The judge did not sound judicial. He sounded clinical. She stopped typing when the tall man leaned over and whispered something into the judge's ear. The judge nodded. Then he ordered the deputies to escort the subjects to holding. Sharon remembered hearing one of the deputies ask if it was necessary. The answer was silence. Then the door shut. She never saw the 2 deputies again. Amanda asked if Sharon knew where the holding area was. Sharon shook her head, but she remembered something else. A coded stamp on the file folder. It read CRX, followed by a long number. She only saw that code one other time. It was on a sealed box delivered 3 weeks later. The courier left it without a signature. The box was placed in a backroom file vault. Sharon never saw it again. Amanda asked who else was present in those hidden sessions. Sharon said only a handful of people ever entered that vault. Judge Laurie, a man named Blake Harrows from county administration, and another figure she knew only by first name, Silas. He wore a badge but never sat with the deputies. She believed he worked for internal review or perhaps something else entirely. Amanda wrote the names down. She thanked Sharon and asked for permission to record her statement. Sharon declined. She said her words would carry more weight on paper. Amanda agreed and left with her notes. Back in her apartment, she searched the county archive database for CRX codes. Nothing appeared. Then she searched for Blake Harrows. His name showed up on budget reports and staff directories from the early 90s. He had managed county personnel affairs. One note stood out. A transfer approval dated May 1995. Destination marked Classified Review. Amanda searched further and found one photograph. Harrows standing with a group of officials outside the courthouse. She zoomed in. Behind him stood another man wearing dark sunglasses and no badge. Amanda labeled him Silas. The next morning, she drove to the Oak Hollow Historical Society. Their archives held physical copies of old courthouse blueprints and building reports. Amanda requested the 1921 renovation documents. A volunteer named Myra brought out a leather-bound register. Inside were diagrams showing the southeast wing. She turned pages carefully. Then she found a drawing that made her breath hitch. It showed a stairwell labeled Sublevel 2. A small side note read Temporary Detention Enclosure. Date of removal listed as 1957. Amanda traced her finger along the path. It ran directly beneath the current file room. She made copies and thanked Myra. On her way out, she asked if anyone had ever inquired about Sublevel 2. Myra smiled faintly and said once. A group of men came in the summer of 1996. They looked like inspectors but refused to sign the guest book. One of them had a scar on his temple and never removed his gloves. Myra said they left with a file folder and never returned. Amanda returned to her apartment with a renewed sense of urgency. She opened her notes and connected more threads. Sharon Wiles confirmed an unofficial hearing. She recalled a judge and a mystery figure issuing verbal orders. She remembered subjects being taken into custody without standard procedure. Amanda added the names to her wall. Blake Harrows, Silas, CRX file codes, Sublevel 2, a cold room beneath the courthouse. Her pen trembled as she wrote the final phrase across the center of her diagram. Unauthorized Judiciary Network. Her brother had not disappeared. He had been processed. The courthouse loomed in the early dusk like a silent sentry watching over decades of secrets. Amanda parked 2 blocks away and double-checked her bag. Inside, she carried a compact flashlight, a printed blueprint from the Historical Society, her phone set to silent, and a pry tool borrowed from her neighbor's workshop. She wore black from head to toe and tucked her hair under a plain wool cap. Her heart beat in steady pulses as she walked the cracked sidewalk toward the southeast corner. The building's rear access door remained chained but rusted. She'd slipped through an open window of the maintenance shed and crept toward the foundation where a crawlspace opening had once been used for electrical inspections. Inside the narrow tunnel beneath the courthouse, dust clung to her sleeves and filled her lungs. She followed the blueprint with a flashlight clutched in one hand and her palm pressed against the cool concrete wall. After 10 minutes, she reached a sharp turn and found herself facing a wall unlike the others. The cement here looked newer, the mortar cleaner. No pipes ran across it, just a rectangular outline set slightly back from the surface. Amanda raised her flashlight and spotted 3 circular marks along the edge. It had once held bolts. She knelt and examined the ground. A faint groove traced the edge of what appeared to be a sealed door. She pulled out the pry tool and wedged it between the groove. It took time and effort. Her muscles ached and the air grew heavier. But after several attempts, a small piece of concrete chipped away. Beneath it lay a rusted hinge. She paused and listened. Nothing moved above. With one final pull, she loosened the panel enough to insert her fingers and lift. A loud creak echoed through the space. Amanda held her breath. No alarms, no footsteps. She'd slipped through the narrow gap and entered a room colder than the tunnel. Her flashlight revealed a space the size of a small office. The walls were lined with file cabinets, all sealed. A steel door stood on the opposite wall. Unlike the panel she had entered through, this door was intact. Amanda approached it and pressed her hand to the handle. It did not budge. She examined the frame. No traditional lock. Only a key slot and a keypad with worn buttons. She backed away and turned her light toward the walls again. Above one cabinet, a small sign read Personnel Evaluation Room A. She opened a drawer. Inside were manila folders. Most were blank on the outside but marked internally with codes. CRX, a series of dates, behavior notes, evaluation summaries. One folder held a photograph of a man she recognized. It was a younger version of Blake Harrows. The page attached noted recommendations for continued involvement and minimal exposure. Another folder bore a name she had never seen. It listed psychological thresholds and compliance ratios. She took photos of every document. Then her light caught a panel near the sealed door. It was covered in dust. She wiped it clean with her sleeve and revealed a biometric scanner. A thin slot for a badge rested below it. Amanda stepped back. The door was not just sealed. It required access that no longer existed, unless someone still used it. She explored the room further. Behind a cabinet, she discovered a narrow metal grate. Inside the grate lay several items, a pair of boots, a torn sleeve, and a sealed envelope. She opened it. Inside was a page with handwriting that chilled her. It read, "I saw the door close. I heard the voices. They said we were compromised. I do not think they plan to let us leave. If you find this, know that we resisted. Know that we tried." The initials KM were written at the bottom. Amanda clutched the note to her chest and sat back against the wall. She knew her brother had been alive long enough to understand what had happened. He had left a message. He had tried to tell someone. She rose slowly and took a final look at the sealed door. Something waited behind it. She could feel it. A tension in the air, a hum barely audible. She took one more photo and returned through the tunnel. Back at her apartment, Amanda uploaded everything to a secure folder and began transcribing the note. She searched every database for badge codes and access protocols. Nothing appeared. She turned her attention to the photograph of the keypad. She examined the wear patterns. The numbers 4, 7, and 1 appeared slightly more worn. She guessed they were part of the code, but the order remained a mystery. The next day, she visited the Oak Hollow Public Records Office and requested employment files from 1994 to 1996. She searched for names connected to courthouse security. One entry listed a security contractor hired for 6 months. The name was Silas Dunham. She recognized the first name from Sharon's memory. The file included a P.O. box and a fingerprint clearance date. Amanda copied the information and left quickly. Later that night, she called Martin Delaney and updated him. She told him she had found a sealed door with biometric security. She said she found Kyle's handwriting. Martin listened without speaking. Then he said he would call a contact in the state archives. He warned her to be careful. Amanda promised she would. The following morning, Amanda received an anonymous email. The subject line read, "They know." The body contained only one sentence. "Do not return to the courthouse. We are watching." She'd stared at the screen without blinking. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard. She closed the laptop and backed away from her desk. Outside her window, a black sedan idled at the corner. It drove away as she reached for her phone. Amanda knew the door was not just a boundary, it was a gate, and someone still held the key. The morning after Amanda received the anonymous warning, she awoke to find the contents of her mailbox scattered across the floor of the apartment hallway. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing was damaged. The mail simply lay in a neat row that led directly to her door. She stared at it in silence for several minutes before picking it up. She locked the door behind her and drew every curtain in the apartment. Her laptop remained closed on the kitchen table. Her phone stayed face down. She knew someone had been inside the building. They had not needed to break in. That meant access. That meant familiarity. Amanda did not panic. She returned to her evidence wall and focused on what she still controlled. The sealed door in the courthouse had not been breached. The biometric panel and keypad remained. She could not open it alone, but she knew someone who might help. She reached out to an old classmate from college named Rowan Briggs. He now worked in corporate security and had a background in biometric analysis. She sent him a coded message asking for help with a legacy security system tied to a local archive. She mentioned old files and unusual encryption. She left out the details. Rowan replied within the hour. He said he could arrive by evening. Amanda picked Rowan up from the train station just after dark. He carried a backpack with compact gear and an expression of quiet concern. She explained everything in the car. Rowan listened carefully. He asked about the room dimensions and the condition of the scanner. He asked if the keypad showed physical degradation. Amanda handed him the photos. He nodded and said it looked like a rotating code system with limited input ranges. That meant brute force could trigger a lockout. He said they would need to clone or emulate an old badge signature. Amanda handed him the badge strip she had found in the personnel file. He examined it and said it might work. That night, they entered the courthouse through the same tunnel Amanda had used before. Rowan moved with quiet efficiency. At the sealed panel, he set up a scanner bypass and linked it to his laptop. He placed a small transmitter against the badge reader and waited for feedback. Amanda stood near the far wall and kept watch. The air inside the hidden room was even colder than before. A layer of moisture lined the concrete like sweat. Rowan adjusted the signal strength and entered several numeric sequences based on the wear patterns. Then the keypad chirped. A low tone echoed through the space. The biometric scanner glowed faintly. Rowan stepped back. The steel door let out a soft mechanical groan and slid open 2 inches. Amanda felt her throat tighten. She stepped forward and pressed her fingers against the edge. The door moved inward with surprising ease. They entered the chamber together. Inside was complete blackness. Their flashlights cut through a heavy curtain of air that felt somehow thicker than what they had breathed moments before. The hallway beyond the door was narrow and curved to the left. Amanda led the way. Each step sounded hollow. They passed a metal bench bolted to the wall and what looked like a deactivated security camera. Rowan tapped it gently and whispered that it had not recorded in years. Amanda kept walking. The hallway opened into a large circular room. The walls were smooth and curved with no visible seams or joints. In the center of the floor stood a heavy wooden chair. Shackles lined each armrest. A faded blanket lay folded at the base. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and mold. Amanda turned slowly and examined the walls. No writing, no signs of human presence. Then she noticed a small red light blinking on a panel near the far corner. Rowan walked over and brushed dust from the panel. He said it was a biometric logger. It tracked entries. He scrolled through the entries. The last access date flashed across the screen. June 12th. 2 days ago. Amanda froze. She asked Rowan if the system was online. He shook his head. Then he paused and frowned. He said something was odd. The logger showed consistent access every 3 days for the past 6 months. The pattern never changed. Always 3 days apart, always the same timestamp. Amanda asked what that meant. Rowan said someone was still using the facility. He pointed to a narrow hallway behind the panel. They moved down the hallway slowly. The walls became rougher. The ceiling lowered. They reached a series of narrow rooms with thick metal doors. Each door had a viewing slot. Amanda opened the first and shined her light inside. The room contained a mattress on the floor, a bucket, and a thin blanket. Scratches marked the walls in uneven rows. The second room was the same. The third had no mattress, only a single chair and what looked like a camera embedded in the ceiling. Amanda turned to Rowan and whispered that this was not just a holding area. It had been used recently. The fourth room was different. Inside lay a pile of tattered clothes and a makeshift journal. Amanda picked it up. The cover was a worn piece of cardboard held together with tape. She opened it carefully. The first page read, "If they move me again, I will leave this behind. If you find it, you must tell them. My name is Tom Briggs. I'm still here." Amanda staggered back and gripped the wall. Rowan took the journal and flipped through the pages. Most of the writing was chaotic, scrawled numbers, fragments of names, a diagram of the hallway, a repeated phrase across multiple entries. "We were never lost. We were placed." They left the room in silence. Amanda clutched the journal against her chest. Her brother had been alive, maybe still was. They returned through the chamber and sealed the door behind them. Rowan wiped every surface they had touched. He removed the logger card and pocketed it. Amanda led the way back through the crawlspace. They emerged into the night. Amanda drove Rowan to a motel outside town. He said he would decrypt the logger file and send her a copy. He promised to contact no one. Amanda returned home and locked every door and window. She placed the journal on her table and stared at it. Her hands trembled as she turned to the first page again. Amanda sat cross-legged on the floor of her apartment with the journal in her lap. The glow from a single lamp cast long shadows across her walls, now covered with maps, photos, and strings of pinned notes. She wore a sweater 2 sizes too large and had not eaten since morning. Her focus narrowed to the brittle pages of the journal, held together by worn tape and the fading determination of a man who had not been seen in 18 years. She turned the pages slowly, careful not to smudge the writing or loosen any pages from the makeshift spine. The first entries were brief observations. The room is cold. The light never turns off. I hear footsteps every few hours. I do not know how long I have been here. The handwriting varied in pressure and legibility, but Amanda recognized something familiar. A kind of rhythm to the sentence structure that matched Tom's speech patterns from years ago. The entries gradually expanded into longer thoughts. He began to mention Kyle. He wrote that they had been separated early on. He believed it was part of a psychological method. One entry read, "They want to see who bends first." We talked through the walls for days, then silence. Amanda continued reading. Tom documented how the food came at strange intervals. No guards spoke. No names were used. The walls felt too smooth to be natural. He suspected the rooms were built specifically for sensory manipulation. He described hallucinations and long stretches of quiet where he believed he had gone deaf. Then the lights would pulse and voices would play through the ceiling. Not real voices, but recordings. Amanda shivered as she imagined the same walls and the same lights. She traced her finger down a page that read, "I still believe someone is looking. Someone outside. I send my name into the dark." In later entries, the tone changed. Tom wrote about a door inside the facility that only opened at certain hours. He never saw who came or went, but he began to hear mechanical sounds like crates being moved or furniture being dragged. He speculated that the space had multiple levels. He mentioned tapping on pipes and receiving responses. Amanda paused and flipped to that section. Tom wrote, "I counted 4 replies, all spaced differently. 1 was close, 2 distant, 1 directly below me. I think I am not the only one left." The entries became erratic. Dates were skipped, phrases repeated. Amanda found a page where Tom wrote the word "forget" nearly 50 times. Then another page with drawings of hallways and corners. At the bottom of one sketch he had written, "small door under vent. Not always locked." Amanda circled that note and marked the page with a sticky tab. Rowan had not seen such a vent, but perhaps the drawing referred to another area deeper within the complex. Near the end of the journal, Amanda found several pages written in a steady and calm hand. Tom had regained some clarity. He mentioned that one night the hallway door opened and he saw a man in a black coat standing just outside the threshold. The man carried a clipboard and wore gloves. He did not speak. He looked into the room and nodded. Tom wrote, "I believe he was someone new. Not like the others. He looked real, not a guard, a visitor." Amanda stared at that line. She remembered Myra from the Historical Society mentioning a man with a scar who wore gloves. She flipped through her notes and matched the date from Tom's journal with the summer of 1996. That visit had not been recorded anywhere else. It confirmed that the chamber remained active a full year after Tom and Kyle disappeared. She turned back to the journal. The final entry came 3 pages later. It was shorter than the rest. "I can hear water through the wall. They come less often now. I do not think they remember this room. If I leave, they will not follow. If I stay, I will become another silence." Amanda closed the journal and sat in stillness. Outside her window, the streets of Oak Hollow glowed with sodium lights and distant traffic. She rose and placed the journal in a waterproof case and locked it in her file drawer. She knew what she needed to do. She dialed Rowan and asked if he had decoded the biometric logger. He said yes. The entries matched the pattern he described. But something stood out. The access times changed slightly in the last 2 logs. They showed a longer duration, as if someone stayed inside the facility longer than before. Amanda asked him to send her the files. He said he already had. She opened the attachments. The data confirmed that someone had entered the chamber 2 nights ago and had remained inside for over an hour. Rowan had traced the badge code used. It matched one issued in 1993. The badge number belonged to a security officer named Colin Drexler. Amanda searched county records and found an obituary. Drexler died in 2001. The badge should have been deactivated. It had not been. Amanda contacted Martin and requested access to the Tribune archives. She wanted to search for any mention of security contractors tied to the courthouse in the mid-90s. Martin agreed to meet her that afternoon. At the archive, they uncovered several procurement reports. One included a purchase order for biometric tracking software and reinforced steel paneling. The name Silas Dunham appeared as the requisition officer. Amanda asked Martin if he'd ever seen the man. Martin said no, but he remembered a strange incident. He said a journalist had gone missing after investigating detention procedures in another county. That man's notes vanished. His apartment was cleaned out within hours. Martin believed the man's name was listed on an evidence folder Amanda had once shown him. Amanda drove home with a growing sense of unease. Her mind returned to the small door beneath the vent mentioned in Tom's sketch. She retrieved the diagram and matched it with the hallway she had explored. The position suggested a chamber just behind the biometric logger. Amanda realized that the logger panel could have concealed another access point. She planned to return with Rowan and search it fully. She looked again at the journal and underlined Tom's final message. "If I leave, they will not follow. If I stay, I will become another silence." She whispered the words aloud and let them settle in the quiet. Amanda and Rowan returned to the courthouse just after midnight. A light rain fell over Oak Hollow, and the streets were mostly empty. They moved through the same tunnel that had brought them to the sealed chamber weeks before. This time, they carried more equipment. Rowan had brought a compact drill set, a thermal sensor, and a vibration mic. Amanda carried a spare flashlight, Tom's journal, and a printed version of his sketched floor plan. They moved quickly but cautiously. When they reached the biometric panel, Rowan used the same cloned badge and numeric sequence. The door opened again without delay. Inside the chamber felt different. The air was thicker and smelled faintly of bleach and something else Amanda could not place. They passed through the curved hallway and entered the main holding area. The walls remained unchanged. The chair in the center still faced the darkness. Amanda walked to the biometric logger and stood before the panel. Rowan removed the faceplate and used a fiber optic scope to examine the inside. After 5 minutes, he looked up and nodded. He pointed to the lower right corner and whispered there was a hollow space behind the panel. He believed there was a second chamber. Amanda showed him Tom's sketch again and placed her finger on the drawing of the small door. Rowan knelt and tapped along the base of the wall. After a few tries, his knuckles hit a panel that gave slightly. He marked the area and began to drill. The sound was soft but sharp. After several minutes, he removed a square of metal and reached inside. His hand touched something smooth. He pulled gently. A thin door swung inward, revealing a crawlspace just large enough to slide through. Amanda went first. The tunnel was dark and curved sharply to the left. After 5 feet, it opened into a narrow room. Her flashlight revealed a metal frame bed, a plastic crate, and a single overhead bulb that did not work. She stepped inside and turned slowly. The walls were covered in writing. Words layered over each other in frantic loops. Names, dates, phrases repeated like mantras. "No one listens. I am not noise. I am not a number." Amanda raised her flashlight higher and froze. In the far corner of the room sat a man. His back was against the wall. His knees were pulled close to his chest. His hair was long and tangled. His beard reached his collarbone. He blinked slowly in the light but did not speak. Amanda stepped forward and whispered the name Tom. The man stirred, his head turned toward her voice. He blinked again. She dropped to her knees and crawled closer. She whispered again, "Tom." Her voice cracked. The man reached forward slowly and touched her hand. His skin felt cold and thin. He whispered one word, Kyle, Amanda turned to Rowan, who had just entered. He lowered his tools and stood in shock. Amanda asked the man if he was Tom Briggs. He nodded once. His mouth trembled as he repeated the word Kyle. Amanda asked where Kyle was. Tom closed his eyes. He tapped the wall 3 times with his knuckle. Then he placed his finger to his lips. They helped him stand. He weighed less than Amanda remembered from photographs. His body shook with each step. They wrapped him in a blanket and guided him through the tunnel. He did not speak again until they reached the biometric door. There he paused and pointed to the biometric scanner. He whispered that they had reset the access code every time someone vanished. He said Kyle had figured out the pattern but never escaped. Amanda asked if Kyle was alive. Tom did not answer. He simply stared at the wall. They returned to the surface just before dawn. Amanda drove Tom to a safe house arranged through Martin. Rowan stayed behind to wipe their digital footprints and destroy the remaining logger data. Amanda sat with Tom in silence while he ate slowly. She watched his eyes track every sound. She saw him flinch when a door closed. She asked him if he remembered his last day on patrol. He said yes. He remembered the trees, the fog, the static on the radio, then the voices, then the masks. Tom slept for 12 hours. When he woke, he asked for paper. Amanda handed him a notebook. He wrote for 2 hours without pause. When he finished, he handed her the pages. The writing described the layout of the chamber, the entry and exit points, the observation panels. He mentioned a second stairwell that led to a deeper room. He said Kyle had been taken there during the first week. He believed Kyle had remained there. He had heard his voice once. He had never seen him again. Amanda showed the pages to Rowan, who confirmed to the directions. He said they had missed the stairwell because it had been hidden behind a false panel. Amanda asked if they could return. Rowan said yes, but not tonight. That evening, Amanda contacted a doctor she trusted, a friend of her mother's who had once worked for trauma units overseas. She explained the situation without names. The doctor agreed to evaluate Tom. She said it would take time to undo what had been done. Amanda thanked her and returned to the safe house. Tom sat on the floor, the notebook in his lap. He looked up and said one sentence. "He is still down there." Amanda knew what came next. Amanda returned to the courthouse with Rowan 2 nights later. The streets were quiet again and the rain had stopped. They parked farther away this time and entered the crawlspace from a storm drain behind the electrical substation. Amanda carried Tom's notebook wrapped in plastic and tucked into her coat. Rowan carried a new set of tools, including a portable ground scanner and a reinforced fiber optic line. Their goal was clear. They would locate the hidden stairwell that Tom described and reach the level below. Amanda had memorized the drawing. The stairs should sit behind the north wall near the logger panel. Rowan moved ahead and used a resonance probe to search for hollow points. After several slow sweeps, the sensor pinged. He marked the section with chalk and drilled a small pilot hole. The bit passed through easily. Amanda placed her eye to the hole and saw darkness beyond. Rowan widened the opening and removed the panel. Behind it stood a concrete shaft with narrow steps descending into blackness. The smell of damp metal and stagnant air rushed up to meet them. Amanda adjusted her gloves and began to descend. Each step creaked. The shaft curved left and narrowed. After 15 feet, the walls turned from concrete to steel. A low mechanical hum vibrated through the floor. At the bottom stood a pressure door marked with faded paint. No signs, no labels. Rowan examined the hinges and wiring. He said the lock was simple. Older than the system above, he twisted a manual override key and the door slid open with a hiss. They entered a corridor wider than the ones above. The walls were polished steel, and the ceiling bore recessed lights that flickered dimly. Amanda walked slowly. The silence felt unnatural. No footsteps echoed. No dust lay on the floor. Everything had been cleaned recently. Ahead, the hallway opened into a chamber shaped like a courtroom. A raised platform formed a bench along the far wall. In front of it stood a wooden table with 2 chairs. Behind the table was a single spotlight pointed downward. Amanda stopped at the threshold. Her breath caught. The chamber was cold. The walls bore no markings except one behind the bench. An insignia she had never seen before. A circle with a horizontal line through the center and 3 downward triangles below it. Rowan took a photo of it and whispered that it resembled a military insignia but lacked any country tag. They stepped farther into the room. Amanda noticed a recording unit mounted to the ceiling. Its lens moved slightly as if tracking motion. She reached for Tom's notebook and flipped to the matching page. The layout was identical. He had drawn the bench and the insignia. He had labeled the spotlight as the point of confession. She turned to Rowan and said this was no courtroom. It was a performance space, a ritual, a judgment chamber. They moved behind the bench and found a locked cabinet. Rowan opened it using a bypass kit. Inside were 3 folders and a small black box. The folders contained photographs and transcripts. Amanda opened the first folder and gasped. It showed Kyle Monroe in restraints seated at the table. The transcript bore the date, April 16, 1995. The first line read, Subject. Monroe has acknowledged deviation. Rowan read over her shoulder. The pages detailed a questioning session. No lawyers, no identifiers, only a list of behavioral questions and emotional responses. The final entry read, Recommendation isolate for long-term reevaluation. Amanda opened the second folder. It held transcripts of other subjects. Names unknown, the content was similar. Questions about loyalty perception of events, willingness to adapt. Amanda whispered that this was not punishment. It was a test, a way to measure obedience. The black box contained data tapes. Rowan packed them into a case and sealed it. They would need analog equipment to decode them. Amanda took the final folder and placed it in her satchel. Then they noticed another door behind the bench. This one was thinner and bore no handle, just a metal plate. Rowan scanned it with his device. He said it used magnetic release. He reached into his bag and pulled out a ringed magnet. He moved it slowly across the plate and the door clicked open. Inside was a small room. The walls were padded. A chair sat in the middle. A sink and drain occupied one corner. On the floor lay a torn shirt and a broken pair of glasses. Amanda stepped closer and saw a name etched into the fabric tag. Kyle. She picked it up and turned it in her hand. The glasses were missing one lens. She placed them carefully in her coat pocket. On the wall above the chair was a single phrase scratched into the padding. I remember who I was. Amanda sat in the chair and closed her eyes. She imagined her brother here, alone, cold, questioned without end. She opened her eyes and stood. They could not stay longer. Rowan checked the time. They had been inside for 90 minutes. Amanda took one last look around the chamber. Her gaze settled on the insignia again. It felt more ominous now, less like a symbol and more like a warning. They exited the chamber and resealed the stairwell. They moved in silence back through the corridor and climbed to the surface. The night air felt warmer now. Amanda drove straight to the Tribune office. Martin met them at the rear door. Amanda handed him the folders and Rowan gave him the data tapes. Martin promised to protect the originals and begin cross-referencing names. Amanda returned home just before dawn. She placed Kyle's shirt on the table and folded it gently. She opened Tom's notebook and added a new entry. We found the court, we found the chair, we know what they did. Amanda stood in the basement of the Tribune surrounded by rows of locked cabinets and gray filing boxes stacked 3 levels high. The air was dry and smelled faintly of ink and old cardboard. Martin sat at a long wooden table hunched over a flatbed scanner as he carefully digitized each page they had recovered from the chamber. Rowan sat beside him cataloging timestamps from the biometric logs. Amanda held the last folder in her lap and stared at the words typed across the top. Subject, Monroe, final review. Her thumb rested on the edge, but she did not open it yet. She had waited years for answers. Her brother had vanished on a routine patrol with a fellow officer, and for nearly 2 decades no one had told her why. Now she knew. It was never about duty or betrayal. It had been about control, a system hidden beneath law, a trial without judge or jury. She opened the folder and began to read. The first page was a summary of behavior analysis. It stated that Kyle Monroe exhibited signs of persistent resistance, non-compliance with narrative shifts, frequent expression of moral autonomy. The document continued with descriptions of monitored responses during isolation and repetition exercises. Amanda's stomach tightened as she read the final line. Recommendation reintegration unsuccessful. Hold indefinitely. She turned the page. A transcript followed. A cold back and forth between Kyle and an unnamed speaker. The questions asked him to recite phrases he did not believe. He refused each time. Amanda read his replies with pride and sorrow. He never yielded. He never became someone else. She turned another page. It was a memo, dated November 1995. It stated that Subject Monroe had ceased verbal participation and had been moved to Chamber Delta for static evaluation. Amanda remembered Tom's words. He is still down there. Amanda closed the folder and rose slowly. She told Martin she needed to return one last time. Martin said it was too dangerous. Rowan said the surveillance patterns had increased since they last broke in. Amanda said she did not care. If there was even a chance Kyle remained somewhere inside the structure, she would not abandon him. Not now. Not after everything. That night, Amanda entered the courthouse alone. She had memorized every step, every turn, every pattern of light and shadow. She moved like a ghost through the tunnel and reached the biometric panel in minutes. The badge clone still worked. The door opened. She descended the stairwell and passed through the courtroom chamber. The chair in the center remained empty. The insignia on the wall glared back at her in silence. She moved to the hidden door behind the bench and passed into the padded room where she had found Kyle's shirt. She paused only long enough to place a photo of him on the chair. Then she followed the wall to the far corner where Tom had drawn a final arrow. A small vent cover. Amanda knelt and unscrewed it. Behind the cover lay a narrow shaft barely wide enough to crawl. She took a deep breath and entered. The shaft twisted and dropped steeply. After several minutes, she reached a junction where the air grew colder. She turned right and emerged into a circular room unlike the others. It had no lights, no furniture, only walls covered in panels. One panel glowed faintly. She approached and pressed her palm to it. A soft click echoed. A door opened inward and a beam of dim light illuminated the figure inside. He sat in a chair facing the wall. His hair was gray at the temples, his body thin. He wore a uniform long since faded. He did not move when she stepped inside. Amanda whispered his name. Kyle. Slowly he turned. His eyes blinked against the light. For a moment he said nothing. Then his lips parted. His voice was cracked and dry. He said one word. Amanda. She moved to him and knelt. He reached for her hand. His fingers were cold but steady. She asked if he knew where he was. He nodded. He said he had been waiting. Amanda told him Tom was safe, that the chamber had been exposed, that the files had been recovered. Kyle nodded again. He said he had heard movement weeks ago. He thought it was a dream. Amanda helped him stand. His legs trembled but held. She wrapped his arm over her shoulder and they moved together through the shaft and back to the chamber. As they reached the courtroom again, Amanda noticed the camera lens tracking them. For a moment she thought of smashing it, but she did not. Instead she turned to the lens and spoke. You failed. He is not yours. They exited through the stairwell and sealed the panel behind them. The air above felt warmer. Amanda helped Kyle into the car and drove to the safe house. Martin and Rowan waited at the door. Tom stood just behind them. When Kyle saw his brother, he smiled for the first time. The two embraced without speaking. Amanda stood beside them and felt a weight lift from her chest. The days that followed moved quickly. Martin published the first article using verified documents and biometric logs. Rowan released the decrypted data tapes to independent investigators. Amanda provided sworn testimony and evidence logs to state authorities. Within a week, the courthouse was closed for federal review. Within a month, 3 former officials were arrested. Within 3 months, silence returned to Oak Hollow, but it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence left behind when secrets are unearthed and people begin to listen again. Amanda visited Kyle each day. He spoke little, but wrote often. His journals grew thicker. One afternoon she found a note he had left for her. It read, "I did not survive because I forgot. I survived because I remembered. Thank you for remembering too." Amanda stood in the woods near the trail where Kyle and Tom had vanished 18 years ago. She held a new map, a map of what lay beneath. She placed it inside a sealed envelope and left it at the foot of a tree marked with their initials. She stepped back and whispered aloud, "Never again in shadow." The sun rose over Oak Hollow. The courthouse stood empty, but the doors had opened, and someone had walked out. If you found this story gripping and want more mysteries like it, make sure to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you thought about the plot and where in the world you're watching from. Your thoughts help shape the next story.